All right, everyone, I am losing my mind because today's guest is my very dear friend, Kate Tellers. And not only is she my dear friend, she has been called by the Wall Street Journal a storytelling guru. And she and I laugh when we hear that said out loud because, like, it's a big word, right? But Kate has this wonderful, glorious gift. And I can't wait to share her, both my friendship with her, with you, and also her great talent. So, Kate, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
100%. And also, you guys, this is the Halloween episode, so you can't see me right now, but I do have on a headband with a dancing ghost and a dancing pumpkin on top. If you do happen to go check out the interview on YouTube, if you've never watched the interview on YouTube, do know that our interviews on YouTube are completely unedited. So this episode, I think, is going to be a particularly, shall I say, rocky, raunchous one, maybe NSFW for some of you. So decide if you're not going to have it on speakers at work today. I mean, who goes into a workplace today anyway? Anyway. Kate, welcome to the show. Can you help our audience know a little bit about, like, what is your job, just to kind of give them some context?
I mean, what a job. So my title at the place on which I am staff. So I work at the storytelling not-for-profit, The Moth. I am the director of Moth Works at The Moth, and I am a member of the creative team. So what does that mean? Basically, at The Moth, we help people tell true stories from their lives on stage. Stories are recorded for podcasts, for radio, for books. And I help sort of vet those stories for podcast radios, build those stories. And then I also run a program where I lead workshops and private events that teach the craft of storytelling.
And in case anyone listening is not familiar with The Moth is like one of the preeminent storytelling organizations in the world. And it has a very, I would say, I don't know how you would describe it, Kate, but I would say it has a very specific sound to a moth story. Like there is a presentness in a moth story. That isn't the same as every other kind in the world. How do you describe the actual, like, modus operandi of a moth story?
Well, I think it's interesting that you say that there's a sound, because the goal, like that we always talk about, and I use the phrase, like, the North Star for a story is truth. So you want the story to be told in the storyteller's voice. So what you hear when you hear a moth story, whether at a live event or podcast and radio, is someone sharing without notes a story that they've crafted with a director a lot of the time that is true to their own experience. So, like, a funny person is going to be funnier, a fast talker is going to talk more quickly, a slower, a quieter person, et cetera, and so forth. They're all going to sound different, but they should sound really honest and true to themselves. And there's no underlying production. There's no music. There's no editing. There's no, so it should feel like conversational would maybe be conversational and honest and vulnerable would be the universal threads, I'd say.
Well, based on what you just said, and I think when I'm even noticing about my own opinion around moth stories having a sound to them, is because we are so used to hearing produced articles on the radio, or produced packages that have music underneath them, or something that's been way more, like, I know you said that it is directed, but something that has been more directed with multifaceted or different voices. It is so unique to hear one story through one voice. And one of the things that I think is so, I'll just share with you that my team was listening to your story. What's the correct title of the cheese one?
But also bring cheese.
Which is a gorgeous story. I'll let you share about what it's about. Will you tell the audience a little bit about what it's about?
Sure. So this is a story that takes place, ultimately deals with the death of my mother, but deals with my anticipation of the death of my mother and the way that you live when you know that someone that you love is going to be taken from you.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful story, and told so eloquently and told so viscerally, I would say. And my whole team was very much like, I had to stop and come back to it because I was having such an emotional reaction to it. And part of what I think is so powerful about the way that Moth helps to people uncover their stories is many of us can think about it being like, oh, it's kind of like, you may laugh when you're hearing a story, but it is not stand-up. And I think the distinction there is so clear. We're not driving towards a punchline. We're driving, like you just said, towards truth. So you've been doing this for a while, and one of your jobs that I understand is to go even into, we've talked about this many times. How am I acting coy over here, right? Like, you go to organizations and you help them. Like, you worked with Melinda Gates and you help these people tell their stories, and you help with organizations. And when you're going to an organization, what's the difference between an organization like, we decided we want to learn how to tell stories? Like, what is that motivation from, like, why does that happen? Why do you think they come to someone like the Moth?
Oh, I mean, well, companies come to the Moth and hire me in my position to make money because people know that what consumers want is they want to feel an authentic connection with a brand. They want to feel understood. They want to feel seen, and they want communication that is very clear. And all of that is what storytelling does best. So, I feel, and I'm in many ways like a very unlikely head of the program that I am, given as someone who comes from a creative background, who is anti-capitalist in many ways, who has never wanted a job in a traditional corporate setting. But what I love about the work that I do is that I'm able to bring these values of like vulnerability and honesty and introspection into spaces where you wouldn't find them otherwise. So businesses are like, we need to tell better stories so that we can get our brand out there and perhaps, increase our bottom line. And it's not always obviously as tactical as that. Of course, I'm speaking very broadly, but then I can go in and say, okay, I'm going to be in a room with 20 people who work together every day. And at the end of 2 hours, these people are going to see each other and understand both each other and themselves completely differently. And that will help them communicate better. That will help them work better as a team. That will help them create better communication. Like it will help with all of those things, but I'm doing it through like, here's why I love storytelling. What's most important to me that I can see if you also tell stories with these values, the work that you also do will be all the better for it. It's not like a here's a corporate story versus here's a good story. Okay, let's just talk about like what makes stories great and what makes the culture of storytelling within a company great, and then do that.
Yeah, I love what you just said, because the people who listen to this podcast are mostly creative people. And what we're always talking about is how when you share your story, like a lot of times I think that one of my biggest ways that this podcast helps people is to help them to learn how to show up or reach out or be seen. And what I think storytelling does is it gives us the hook into seeing you, into understanding you. And that's why I think stories are such a great way to elevate that. A lot of times I'll be talking to someone and they'll write a letter, or they'll be reaching out to someone, and it becomes so corporate speak that I'm like, no one cares about. I read your letter and it's really well written and no one cares. And the care factor is, I think, what story gives, and whether that is a full story or a piece of your story. Like right now, this is what I'm working on or whatever. Like we get more engaged as I think it's written into our DNA and in our humanness that we do that. So let's backtrack. I want to make sure everyone hears, like, I'm good. Don't worry. I'm going to drill Kate on a few questions around like good storytelling and how to get involved in all that towards the end. But first I want to give them a little bit of insight into how we met. And like you said, wouldn't be if you were to look at Kate's background when she was growing up, you wouldn't say this is exactly the job she'd have. So because you are a performer. Can you share a little bit about that past for us?
Yeah, I don't think you'd see me like flying across the world to do a presentation in London, or like, dropping into Portland with Nike here and there back in the day. So yeah, I came to New York City as an actor. I'd done some regional theater, and I was really excited to try my luck in the Big Apple. And I got hired at an acting studio for my day job. First, working the front desk, answering phones, formatting resumes, opening up studios, and then later as a career consultant, where I helped people, paired them with the acting classes, and then ultimately taught acting classes. And that is where I met you.
Yes. And wait, just so we're clear, Kate and I both worked at this place. This is the first place I was ever a career coach. And we also like toured the country. Did you ever go to London with me or no? I don't think you did you? No.
We did not go to London together. We certainly went to Orlando.
Yes. So Kate and I would tour the country and teach at the Northeastern Theater Conference, the Southeastern Theater Conference. Yep. We would teach the business of acting and help a lot of actors straight out of college or on their way to college learn how to work this wild and woolly business. And of course we got into wild hijinks. I mean, I will just share one little window, and Kate, you'll tell me if I'm not you'll keep me honest here. We booked our flight a day early on accident to Orlando when we were supposed to go to a conference. And when we found ourselves in Orlando, I was like, well, obviously we'll be going to Disney World. And so we spent a day at Disney World, kind of not exactly on the company's dime because, no. Right.
But yeah. But we definitely were like, well, there's nothing to be done here because no one has checked into it. Like it technically started that day, but we didn't realize that like there was no networking to be done. Like people were checking in and we were like, well, we'll do this. And we did it so on the cheap. I mean, do you remember we were like, how do we get there? Should we walk?
Yes. Yeah, for totally. And also like and Kate is a fabulously talented performer. She has incredible presence, and I directed her in a cabaret show. And so Kate and I are very, very dear friends. And so that's part of why I wanted to have you on the show today. So the question I want to ask you is, in all this, so when I say this, you tell me this is true for you. You feel like you've taught people from all different walks of life how to tell stories better. Is that true? Would you say?
Certainly. Yeah.
And in that, beyond understanding better, or before I go there, what's the one thing that becomes the thing you say to everyone? Is there one thing you say to every single person when you're working on a story with them?
I mean, there's obviously the your story matters thing that is like permeates through the ethos of everything. And I run one of the training programs at the Moth, but we use storytelling in different contexts, and you teach storytelling differently depending on the population that you're reaching and the goals that they have for stories. So your story matters is throughout all of that. I would say in terms of a craft thing, something that I find so useful and kind of goes with that is that, like, the more specific you are in your story, the more universal your story is. So, instead of saying, I'm not even using my classic example, but instead of saying like, I was nervous, you say something like, I didn't realize that my hands could sweat as much as they did. Or, I put my hand on the counter and it slid. Or, like I noticed when I said hello, my hand was shaking. I'm making it all about the hands, but
Yeah.
that thing where like, you're like, oh, I get it. Like, now I'm grounded in your world. Now I see what your world is like. Now I know how similar I am to you and how different I am to you at the same time.
And when you just said that, I got this image of the person being like, yeah, but my story of going to the grocery store isn't interesting enough. Do you ever have that like confrontation of someone confronting something about themselves? I'm not interesting enough, or the facts of my story aren't interesting enough. When what you just said is about an experience, it's not about the pharmacist was nice or not nice to me. It's not about like I made it to the store with my to-do list. It's about my hands were sweaty, like the internal experience. Is that also something that you see come up all the time?
Right. Like, emotions are universal. And I think the stakes of your story, like the stakes in a personal story being like what's important to you, are what make it compelling to a listener. So it doesn't matter, like, if I'm telling a story about being in a car accident, if I don't care, like if I came out unscathed, if I have tons of money and don't, and I'm like, I'll just buy a new car, whatever. It's not an interesting story at all, but I could tell a story about, I remember telling a story once about my son when he was a baby, like freaking out at a bus stop, just crying. And like, that's not like, babies cry, like that's it. But for me, it became this big thing of, I don't know how to parent my child. I'm not doing this right. He deserves a better parent. I don't understand him. Why don't I, and then it becomes like a really loaded story, and like what I did to comfort him and how I figured it out and the happiness I felt when I could connect with him. And I was like, oh, good. I do have maternal instinct. Like, I do know what he needs, even though it's literally a story about a kid crying, a baby crying. Like, that's like one of the most universal stories of all time.
Yeah.
So I certainly combat that. And what happens to me a lot of the time is the person that says, I don't have a story to tell, is the one that you ask, like, you go 3 questions in and then you're like, then they like crack. And then it's like, aha. Yeah. And I think some of it is self-protection in the beginning. And some of it is, those are the people that are actually taking what you're saying seriously and not saying like, oh, I'll just be like some flamboyant raconteur who's going to wow you with a story of the time that I got someone to buy a drink for me, which is like, okay.
Right. Yeah. And I think what's so important about what you're saying is I can imagine the internal experience of that person and feeling validated for that experience. What is the thing that you see on the other side of people telling stories? So I know a little bit about your work. So when you're going to a corporation, like, you have a little bit of a performative moment at the end where people share their stories. Some people share their stories, right? These are people who may have never walked on a stage before in their lifetimes. Or is there a theme, or is there a universality that you see once they've told that story that they walk away with?
I mean, I think it's similar to whenever we do anything that we're terrified of and we get to the other side, because I think, there's this like joke, and I think it's a Seinfeld joke. I'll credit him here for that, though I'm not sure, where he says, statistically speaking, people's biggest fear is public speaking, and second biggest fear is death, meaning people would rather be in the coffin versus tell the eulogy. Like, sorry, Jerry Seinfeld, I completely effed your joke. You can do it at the Comedy Cellar. But anyway, and so I think for a lot of people, it's that like exhilaration. But I think, and to me, and I always feel this way, like, it's not just about the like final share, it's about the process. And people will say like, I never realized that about myself. I never saw it in this way. I never realized these moments were connected. And then they'll be also heard, like literally saying your story out loud, even if it's not to an audience, but especially when it's to an audience, the act of speaking and feeling heard, like that sort of, two-way, but one verbal dialogue that goes on between audience and teller is really magical. And I think we lack that. Like we don't give ourselves the space to just say like this experience that I had was meaningful and has shaped me and is someone. And the experiences that we think are the most important are often not. And the experiences that we come back to all of the time often mean something very different than what we initially thought that it was. And they evolve. Like our stories are not. Yeah.
I want to see you speak more about what you just said. Sometimes the stories we think are the most important are not. Can you tell me a little bit what does that mean when you say that? Like where were you taught? How were you taught that? How did you witness that?
Well, the classic thing, I mean, I think because people classically they want to be like engaged. Everyone wants to be like the most interesting person in the room. So they want to talk about their accomplishments. So like the classic thing is everyone wants to tell the story about running a marathon. And I'm like, great. That's freaking great. I can't run a marathon, but that's not interesting. Saying like, I'm good at something. And so then I did it more and now I'm good at something. So, I always say like, I'm not interested in the story of the marathon. I'm interested in the moment you almost turned back. Like, where's your vulnerability? Where's your tension? Where's your question? So I think for a lot of people, they come into the workshop and they're going to be like, I'm going to tell the story about the time I won something. I won a marathon, blah, 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 blah. But the more interesting story is like, well, what's the story that you always like in the scene of your life or in the movie of your life? What are the scenes that you come back to? And like, this is completely ridiculous. And I've actually never made this into a story, but it is a seed of something somewhere. I'm obsessed with like puberty, early teens, tween time, and like the way it really shapes who we are. I think those moments. And I was cut from my High School Musical when I was a freshman. And
wait, what was the musical? We need to know.
Brigadoon.
Of course.
And I would lay in my bed, tossing and turning with the music waiting for my dearie in the back of my head. And I know I haven't actually made the story, but I have made the story. I haven't actually told the story or crafted anything, but I know there's something there about like, I was a completely insecure kid. The only thing that I could do was theater. I finally was doing theater and then being told like, you're like, it just completely ignited every insecurity in my body and like brought me to my knees, but that's like a ridiculous, you say that to someone, like, I'm going to tell the story about the time I was cut from a play when I was 14 years old. And people were like, you've literally done nothing in the decades since, and of course I have, but like, that will come up for people, or people will say like, I had this interaction with my dad that, I've always thought was this, like, I always thought my dad was being a jerk. And then I became a parent and I realized, my dad was doing the best that he could. Like we re-see moments, almost banal moments in our life with a heavier weight as our stories continue to,
I got the image of like,
each other.
When you dog ear a book or something, like I want to remember that. Like, they're like, oh yeah, that happened. And I didn't really clock what impact it had on me. And so obviously this work is very therapeutic for people. And I'm imagining it's therapeutic for you. And when you're in any of these environments, you're holding a lot of emotion.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Beyond the, like, I'm scared shitless that someone's going to ask me to tell the story on the stage. You're holding the emotion of we actually are going back and looking at a part of our lives or whatever. Can you speak a little bit about what that's taught you just to be there? I think it's let me tell you what it's telling me about myself first. I
think it's reinforced for me a curiosity that I like. And then I think, curiosity means that like my work will be endless because there's always more people to find. There's always more stories to hear. There's always more connections to make. I can hear a story that I heard 5 years ago and hear it with different ears than I do now. And so that fills me with optimism. And I think that's not universal to myself. I mean, I think I have it. It is obviously a job requirement that I be a person who is curious about other people in the line of work that I do. And I think like, what has it taught me about, it's easier. I think in the workshops, it's one thing. It's like, particularly in the workshops that I teach where people are being brought in to like apply these skills professionally, I have to both emotionally take care of people, but make what I'm doing teachable. So I have to like tie it back to a principle. So like you are crying right now because your, father didn't show up to softball practice. I have to hold space for that. And I also have to be like, if you open it in scene, it will be, more universal, or like your stakes were unclear in that part of the story. So I have to do those two things.
Yeah.
But I think another thing that I think are instincts that I don't know quite how to describe getting into this, but another thing that I do is I host live shows, and my job as a host, it's like not an MC job, it's a host job. Like I find that to be a huge distinction. So for people that don't know, when we put on a show, we're putting on shows like we've done Sydney Opera House, which is, thousands of people, the Schnitz in Portland, 3,000 people, our smallest houses at this point are over 400 people. So you're telling people, we're asking people to go on stage. Many people who have never stood in front of a microphone, never stood on a stage before, have no stage training, and just tell a story about yourself. And then my job is to make sure that the audience is interested. The storyteller has the time on the stage, but like to keep that interest going. So to use an example, I just got back from Boston. So it was, I don't know what the hell, like 900 people. And we had people from like a guy whose job is to pick up bodies after they die, to a soldier dealing with PTSD, to a Mexican wrestler, to an intersex woman falling in love for the first time, to a woman dealing with the very young death of her daughter. Like these are all the different stories that are on the stage. So my job as the host is to get the audience excited and entertained in the beginning, and then to sit there in the room and be like, how is the audience receiving this storyteller? This storyteller has, particularly the show, obviously there were a lot of like very big themes in it. This storyteller is doing this to the audience. My job is to reset, literally. So do I have to come on with a joke and respond to humor and keep everyone laughing? Do I have to like break some tension? Do I have to give space to this story and give everyone in the room a chance to reset? Or do I have to, whatever, has someone told me that I have to give information on something else in here? And what that's allowed me to do is both obviously calibrate to that, so when I host, like I always have like, there's 3 different ways I'll respond to the story, depending on what happens in the room, but also really revel in like the commonality of experience that happens when we share stories, that I'm not like, oh, that dude in row F seems annoyed. It's, oh, the entire audience, obviously it varies person to person, but I can sense like a general feeling in the room and like what it really feels like to be in community, and that people in these spaces are coming in and being in community together and like sharing feelings. I mean, there's science behind this. Our brains sync up, our breath syncs up, our hearts sync up. It's exciting to allow myself to feel that, and then to like be a part of people's experience throughout, the ups and downs of that in the longer sense of a full show.
Yeah. And I can imagine that what you just described is very moving. I mean, when you were telling me it was moving, but also like different than telling a story, because you are really feeling with, and then also like, I don't know, like not the metronome, because it's not about the cadence of the room. That's not exactly what it is, but you are definitely like the temperature taker. And because I could just experience, like, if this is a super sad story and the next person's is really funny, whatever, like I'm being very like,
right.
I'm reducing it a little bit by saying sad and funny, but you get what I mean? Like you have to allow the audience to reset so they can take in something new. And yet Absolutely. You're wanting to maintain that, like, everyone's hearts are beating at the same time. You're like spiritually holding hands right now, and we're going to go to the next story kind of thing. I can see that would be. And so what I'm hearing you say is that connects to also who you are as a teacher.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Is that people, I mean, I think like a lot of the time people don't know what they're saying. Do you know what I mean? So someone will say something, and it's like, you don't know how you're responding to it, but someone will say something that they think is a joke. And I'm like, oh, that's a piece of pain there. Or other people, I can sense other people are hearing it. It's not just pain. Like I'm making this sound far too pathos, but like, you know what I mean? They'll say something that they don't realize is funny and everyone laughs. And then we all have to be able to respond to it and like sort of identify, well, what's funny about that, or what's not funny about that, or more importantly, what's the truth behind that? And how do we, kind of acknowledge what happened in this room? Just because you have a funny line doesn't mean it is funny, for example, given the larger context of the story that you're sharing. And given that a lot of the time people share stories and they don't know what the story is about in the first path. So listening for that.
Got it. One of the things I just got from what you said is, we may, as a performer, and I want to get back to the story of you getting to your job in a second now, but the story as a performer is like, okay, your goal is to entertain, your goal is to make them laugh, your goal is to make them sing the song as they leave the theater. And that's actually not the goal of storytelling, is to get the most truthful you can possibly, because that is what is going to activate the audience, for lack of a better word, right? So when you're working with people, I can imagine like the specifics you're trying to pull out of a moment are, can we make this is truth is not you can't qualify truth, but can we make this feel more true to the people who are watching it? Is that kind of where, is that what you're hearing?
Well, it's funny because we're writing a book right now, 5 of us in the creative team, and it's we get into like the nerdiest arguments and the conversation of truth. Like, I mean, we just have, it's been a while, but one of the we were debating the other day for a storyteller, should we use the language, should the story be honest or feel honest? And for a storyteller, what's the difference of that? Like, you know, we all have our own narratives. We all tell each other what we believe. So I can say something like, you know, my cousin is really vindictive. If I feel like my cousin is vindictive, then that is a truth for me. I mean, I'd be a shit to say it on stage, obviously, but like, I'm sorry if I'm swearing and do want to fire me.
You're good. We warned everyone. Everybody, we warned you.
Okay. But you know what I mean? Like if I believe that someone is wronging me in the arc of my story, I either have to further unpack that or know that that was true for me in that moment. So is the story honest, or does it feel honest to the teller? And I think sometimes I think there's a big difference, and sometimes I think there's no difference at all, which is what the whole debate was about. But I think, yeah. So what needs to be happening with a storyteller is they need to be sharing from a place where they truly believe everything they're saying. And we're not stupid as human beings. We know when someone's putting something over us, or trying to, or not dealing, you know, like just like passing over a detail that's like too hot for them, to use a Joan term.
Yeah. One of our famous acting teachers, you guys.
Is that too hot for you? Is something bubbling up? Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So question about what you just said, because I'm sure we could talk about the definition of truth forever. But first of all, I do want to make sure we don't run over the fact that you are working on the Moth's 4th book right now. What is that process like for you?
So there's 5 of us writing a book. We've written it entirely in the pandemic, meaning that we get on Zoom, and now the book we're going to copy editors. So we're like, you know, at the end, we started with everyone writing on, I mean, this is a how-to book, I should say. Okay. So different than our other books. Our other books were anthologies of stories that have been told on stage, lightly edited for the page. This is a how-to book. The audience is for anyone that wants to tell their story. So if you want to get on stage at the Moth, that's great. If you want to use storytelling to tell a better wedding toast, if you want to tell it to connect with friends, if you want to use it in business, like it's all there. And we have applications throughout the book. And
is it going to be great? Is it going to be great?
It's super great. It's super great. I mean, now I'm at the point where I'm like, if I read it one more time, I will burst into flames. You know what I mean? But we're still like, that's the thing, is these are the people that I'm writing this book with, I've been working with for well over a decade, you know, and the Moth was a very different organization when we all started there. So we've like crafted these ideas, these thoughts. So we'll really get into it and be like, that's not how it was, or that is how it is, or, you know, in a loving way. It's incredibly supportive and fun experience. But yeah, right now we're in like 4 to 5 hours of Zoom every day, reviewing edits, putting in new writing, adding the book is full of examples from storytellers throughout the years. So really making sure that we're highlighting stories that exactly speak to the concepts of the book, that showcase the breadth of our community, that showcase the impact of storytelling. And we have, you know, we have such love for our community and for our tellers in particular. It's a very intimate thing to craft a story with a storyteller. You know, you're in these, you know, many long conversations about something that by nature of being a good story is very important to them. So we all are like completely in love with our storytellers. So it's like killing your darlings anytime. If our editor's like, there's too many examples here, we're like, no. We can't.
And I can imagine these conversations can get heated because there's all strong, smart people deciding these. You guys are like, we need this one and we need this one. So you're. It sounds like you're near like the end of this race though, which feels good.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And I think like we've really developed. You know, I love Brian. You know, as a multi-time collaborator with me. Like I love collaboration, but I also believe you have to have opinions on parsley. So I like people that come in with a strong point of view, and I come in with a strong point of view. When I have, you know, the classic, I don't die on every hill. I think I stepped out of be honest or feel honest at one point. I was like, I think I'm cool with either of that. You know what I mean? But I freaking love those conversations. Like I love it. They're exhausting, but I love that we care so much, that we know so much, that we're pulling so much experience into things. And, you know, that we're writing, some of the stuff we're writing about is like, truly powerful. I mean, to
Yeah.
me, it's the most important stuff in the world. So
When are we going to get to buy this book? Is this too early to say that?
April 2022, our 25th
Okay, it's
anniversary.
happening. Okay, great. April
Yeah.
2022. Great. So, wait, we need to go back to being a performer in New York City, working together at an acting studio, and then being at the Moth. Because how long have you been at the Moth now?
My first show I went to was Themed Beginnings in 2007, and I joined staff the following year, 2008. So we're looking at 13 years.
Yeah, right. And so tell us a little bit about that journey to, being an actress in New York City and like jumping into the Moth and how that all happened.
So I, as you know, Brian, I was an actor in New York. I came to New York, like very interested in stage, as most often people do. And I did music theater and was interested in that and started doing all sorts of things like that. But then I pretty quickly got into comedy. I started taking, as you did, particularly in those days when you're interested in comedy, I took improv classes at UCB. I started an improv group. I wrote sketch shows. I did all of that. And then I got into solo stuff. So I was doing stand-up. And then we did the cabaret. I got more interested in that. And then
which was a one-person cabaret. Let's just be clear. I was not in it. I just helped Kate shape and direct this show. So again, one person. I'm just kind of I want to make sure we're acknowledging how it was about solo voices, solo work on stage.
Solo voice. Also, I will say this, Brian, Ray the Cabaret. Recently, I went to our friend Steffi Check's house and I played the piano there. And I came home. I haven't played the piano in years, but I used to play it very seriously. Impulse bought a keyboard, 88 keys in my home, weighted keys. I just did it. This is not me. You've known me for 2 decades. This is not.
Yes. Take you a couple of weeks to make that decision. Yeah.
Years.
Yeah.
Years to make that decision. Are you kidding me? I have dependents. I have children to feed. So then I went into my basement and opened up my suitcase of music and I found my book. So my 16 bar cuts are all there. The arrangement, the piano arrangement of It's Raining Men that Steven Silverstein did for the finale, the curtain call of my cabaret.
Yes.
All there. I am living right now. It is so amazing. Anyway, so I did this cabaret, but while all of this is happening, I'm working at the acting studio. Then I left the acting studio. It was too much to emotionally take on other people's acting dreams while I was going to mine. So I was like, I'm going to wait tables. Like someone says, I want a sandwich. I'm going to give you a sandwich. Other people are coming to me and being like, I want to change my life as an actor. And I was like, it's too much. I want to change my life as an actor. Stop. So anyway, I did that. Then I worked at an advertising agency. So I had a day job. I was doing, a lot of comedy, a lot of black box theater. So I wasn't living exclusively off of that. In the meanwhile, my mother is sick and she's getting progressively worse. And so I'm, and I was very close to my mother. So I'm like spiraling into this, like, who am I? What am I doing on this earth? Why am I here? I remember one time I was doing, the Reindeer 8. Do you remember that show? It was monologues of all of the 8 reindeer because Santa had sexually harassed Vixen. Okay. And we were doing it in the basement of a bar in Chinatown. And my mother was sick. My sister was going back. I was going back here and there. And I was like, Mom, I have to come home. And she was like, the work you're doing is important. And I was like, Mom, I'm wearing antlers in the basement of a bar in Chinatown. But what she meant and what it was a great gift to me was like, but Kate, but this is who you are. Like, this is the way you create, the way you communicate. This is the community. She knew the community that was going to be with me when she died. She was like, these are the relationships that you keep and build and foster. So anyway, my mother dies. And I'm in this full, like, who am I? What am I? But really the 2 questions that came up were, what am I doing with my time? Why am I spending so much time like temping at an ad agency? And what's the legacy I'm leaving after I go? And I had been doing comedy then for several years. I was really frustrated with like the manipulation of setup punchline. I mean, stand-up now is very different than stand-up when I, back in 2007, or I was doing it probably before that. But I just was like, this isn't honest. I'm telling the same joke over and over again, and I'm sharpening it so that I can get the exact same reaction every time. And doesn't feel like it feels like manipulation. It doesn't feel like connection. So I heard a Moth story on This American Life. This was pre-podcast, pre-radio. And at the end, it said, there's a live event in New York City, beginnings. I walk into the New York Poetry Cafe, September 11th, 2007, with my cousin, who's not a vindictive bitch. She's lovely. Just so we're not getting cousins confused. That was a made up cousin before. And people are standing up as an open mic and sharing their stories. And the whole crowd laughs together. The whole crowd cries together. I always say it was like we were all breathing the same breath. And like 3 stories in, I was like, what do I need to, this is it. This is exactly what I want. And I've never, like, we found recently a cover letter that I wrote to be an intern, and it's so dorky.
Wait, did I help you write this cover letter?
No, Brian, because in it I say I'm handy with a stapler, and you never would have let me say that. Also,
No.
I'm not handy with it. Like, let's be honest, like my freaking admin skills are limited. So anyway, so I like interned, and I happened to be, they just had this idea to do a podcast, and I happened to edit it in GarageBand, the free software. We went to number 1 on iTunes. We beat This American Life. And everyone was like, I remember executive director coming out and being like, we're number 1 on iTunes. I'm taking you out to celebrate. And I was like, I literally do nothing but drop audio files in GarageBand. Anyway, so then I stayed and I produced shows and I directed shows, and I, really took off with this program, and has been where a lot of my focus has been since then. But it was always that, like, I always loved the connection that I felt with an audience when I was doing like the best theater, the best comedy, the best music theater. And I was always interested in personal narrative. My mom gave me a Studs Terkel book when I was like 16 years old and was like, you'll love this. And I studied in theater. I designed, my degree was drama and anthropology. I combined them. It's like 2/3 drama, 1/3 anthropology, because I was interested in the authentic representation of people on stage. That's all, that's, the type of theater I've been attracted to outside of music theater. It's like kitchen sink,
Yes.
like what's the freaking gritty scene work? That's always what I've loved.
I think for me, I've never heard that exact story there in Eureka Poets Cafe. I've never heard that story before. I didn't know that. So that was really exciting to hear. And the other part of it, for knowing you for so long, but the other part of it that I think was really exciting for me, and I think also for the listeners here, is, a lot of times, I have the same journey where I was an actor and I was like, oh, no, this is what I meant to do. And I can just hear in all of this how the actor part of yourself has informed everything that you've been able to accomplish. Like, it wasn't like the actor part of you had to die and this other dream had to arise. It was actually this. Do you feel like the reason you are so good at what you do, or like, how do you mentally connect the dots to the actor to what you're doing now?
Well, a lot of what I do is, when I'm teaching, I'm presenting, and when I'm hosting, there's a lot of just like essential ability to communicate and be comfortable in your body on stage. So that's all an acting thing. A lot of it is improv. Like, I'm very comfortable. You can throw I shouldn't say that because now there's going to be a challenge, but like, I hosted a show where, someone like passed out and screamed during one of the stories, and I had to come up on stage after that. I've been on stage at corporate events where it's like, you're on stage for hundreds of people. People have sunk tens of thousands of dollars in this. And like, oh wait, Kate, we told you at 30 minutes. Now you have 20, and like that. And this is not a brag. This is just like, there is all of those skills are things that I'm immediately like, pull it up. Like, what are your improv skills? What are the beats that you need to know? How do you understand? What's your emotional connection to your material? Like, all of that completely translates. Yeah. And I think also, when you're, this is so basic, but when you're comfortable being in front of people and entertaining people, you make your audience comfortable and then they listen. It's as simple as that. So that goes to like teaching, present, it's like all those, what they call soft skills in business, which I would argue there are not soft skills in business,
that's what brought to me, is like, so much I think of an actor or performer can say, yeah, everything that I do doesn't matter unless it's exactly acting. And actually, you have what some from the outside might see as a very like creative and also works in corporate circles job. And like, all of the skills that you have are so, you would not be able to do that job without that great background in what you've done already. And I think that actors can be very quick to, or creative people can be very quick to say, well, yeah, I only know how to paint like this, so what I can do cannot be applicable anywhere else. And it writes off, I think, the ability to say, I'm allowed to make money doing something else. I'm allowed to be validated for doing something. I'm allowed to be proud of doing something else, right? And I think that, and the something else suddenly goes away when you say like, oh, this is what I'm meant to do. The elseness, the otherness of the other dream, I think, shows up, which I think is really powerful when you talk about this. So a question for you. Thanks for letting me really go in here with all this stuff. So wait, something you shared a few minutes ago, I've got 1,000 questions, but the one that's coming up right now is when you shared the stories of like PTSD and losing a child at a very young age, like these can sound very extraordinary to the people who are listening right now. And yet we talked earlier about like, actually ordinary things are enough. It is your internal journey around them that makes it, like, it could be like, and a ladybug landed on my windowsill, but there was all this other stuff going on that had to do with about this, right? So when do you have to fight that urge from people? I know I'm kind of asking a question I asked earlier, maybe in a different way, but you have to fight that urge from the person to always choose the extraordinary. I'm going to talk about the death of my dog. I'm going to talk about the time I got really sick and almost died. I'm going to only pick do you have to kind of pull people? I know it's easy to, I know you said a lot. I'm sure that in the environments you're in, people want to choose like when I ran the marathon or when I achieved this, like I want my gold star moments. So is it hard? Is that a difficult conversation? Like, where do you even begin to get them to get out of that mindset?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult conversation. And I think like the important thing isn't that your story is life and death. It's that it should feel life and death to you. And, like I'm always like, gosh, anxiety is so good for storytelling because everything can feel like life and death. Like if you have anxiety, you have stories.
Got it. Everyone listening, we all qualify as storytellers. We just got it.
I mean, you are all storytellers, regardless of what your relationship with anxiety is. But anyway, yeah, certainly. And I think the other thing is, you don't want to like, there's this classic example and it's in the book. I hope I'm allowed to say what's in the book. Anyway, we have a,
you heard it here first. You heard it here first, people. You heard it
the book hasn't, I don't know. Well, anyway, here's an example that we talk about a lot that may or may not be in the book.
Okay, great.
We have this astronaut who tells stories at the Moth. Now, most of us have never been to space. We've never trained as an astronaut. We may not have a job with the prestige of it. Like it's just so unrelatable. But he has a story about going on a mission and being floating in space, working on his vessel, and he strips the screw. And he's like, I can't do the job that like literally millions of taxpayer dollars have sent me here to do because I just effing stripped a screw. Now everyone can relate to, if not stripping a screw, something like that, except for that he's in space. Like he can't go to his toolbox. Anyway, it all works out. But it's like, you have to, even in those big stories, find the smaller moments. And, if you go back to the story about my mom, deals with the night of her death specifically, but then like builds sort of the emotional world around that so that we understand what walking into her room at X time, what that actual loss felt like. Like you have to ground even those big stories in like real specifics to create the world that your audience can then come into and relate to, even if the experience isn't the same.
Yeah, that's really, really powerful. And I really, everyone, we're linking to Kate's story in the show notes here. And I really encourage you to listen to it, not just because I'm a huge fan of Kate, but also because I think that you really be illustrated what she's just said, beyond the fact that we take you on a beautiful journey inside of her story. In all the work that you do, Kate, what has it taught you the most? Maybe it was a surprise even, or what do you learn every day?
I think storytelling is the great equalizer. And I have been in the presence of famous people, with very influential people, with people who schedule their lives in 15-minute increments, which now I understand a little bit more. And you probably at this point do, Brian, but you know what I mean? Like, but you get in a room with them and you talk to them about their stories, and it's like that all goes away. Everybody is insecure. Everybody has moments of their lives that they don't think are interesting, that may be really interesting. Everybody wants to be seen. Everybody wants to be heard. We have all of our different ways of getting there, but I think it's truly, to me, like humanized humanity. If that doesn't sound, it's like kind of ridiculous, but you know what I mean? Yeah. Like I'm no longer like, we had a gala and we had a celebrity that everyone was going just really like, oh my gosh, they're going to be there, and their people and their agents and their whatever. And they came out of the limo and they put me like on front because they know that I don't get weirded out by celebrities. And I was just like, okay, we just had the nicest rapport. I'm not saying that I'm like great at this. I'm saying that like, I was delighted to meet another human, and I didn't let like the nerves of the fact that this other human has 1 million awards, is like a household name, throw me in that way. And that's delightful, that I feel like I can see people as humans and not titles, even though titles is good.
Titles is good, but yes. I love what you just said, because I would say that it's one of the things that at least the listeners to this show, I think, really believe in, which is no matter what business you're in, everyone's a human being. And that I do believe that kindness can be the way that you, I hate to say this, but get what you want. There's no reason that kindness cannot be the distinction behind all of your actions that you take. And that seeing someone as a full human being, which is what you're doing, is like, I'm so glad you have all these awards. And you're a human being, and that's even better than that. Like there's some, like the best thing about you is that you're a human being. Like I think that is the part that is exciting when you say it that way. So you've worked with lots of famous people, so lots of famous businesses, the State Department, Nike, Spotify, all these fancy places. So in all of that work, has there ever been like, what's your favorite kind of work to do? Is it corporate-y stuff? Is it with this kind of, is it someone who's really hard to work with? Like when are you like the most like, I am digging this right now? Like, I don't want to go to lunch. I don't care. Lunch is coming up. Like I'm having fun right now. When does that happen for you?
Oh, it's the hosting for sure. It's
Really?
yeah. And the hosting happens, either on the main stage or in the work that I do with companies. It's the being able to be like the person in the room that's like setting the room, that's priming the room for the other tellers, that's listening to it and then responding to it, that's either making people laugh or holding space. Like I love that. I mean, I love that in my personal life, as I love to host dinners. I love to bring people together. Lois Weisberg is my freaking idol. I cannot believe I didn't name my daughter Lois. But like I love that connection, and I love to use any ability that I have, like any skill that I have to make those connections between people that wouldn't otherwise be connected. And my like medium for that is storytelling, and whether that's in a workshop, in a show, in a showcase, and whatever, like it's just such a thrill to be a part and be an agent and taking people from strangers to like people that see each other in a different way.
That's awesome. That is so, and it's also what I hear inside of it is it starts with the storytelling. Storytelling is the room. You're setting the tone for the room. I just love the way you describe that. And we're getting towards the end here, so I don't want to take too much of your time. So I want to appreciate you for all the time you've given us already. And I want to ask you another question around what you just described of like being this host and setting the tone and keeping us moving when we're telling a story like that. When does Kate break a sweat? You seem like a real cool cucumber about all this stuff. Is there ever a time where like, damn, I don't know what to say. I get stuck here, particularly around this work?
I would say I almost wish I got more nervous at this point. I don't really get nervous. I mean, I definitely like I have enough before any time that I'm going to be in front of people. I don't breathe. You know what I mean? Like I don't do the acting stuff that we used to do. Do you remember with Joan, we would like throw ourselves halfway on the ground and be like, huh, huh. Like you do not.
You're not rolling around on the floor and doing Alexander technique.
No, I mean, I have stuff on a day. If I'm going to do a big show, I definitely make sure that I move my body because that works really well. And I often get a manicure because it makes me sit still and because I'm a hand talker, and then it like gives me a little confidence.
Yeah.
But
that's a good trick. I think we all should. That's a great one. I love you.
Oh, that's a trick. Yeah, I've been doing that since I was an actor. I used to always get a manicure for my characters, and then that's my thing because I don't sit still ever. I mean, I think so I need to literally have someone be like, I'm putting paint on your hands. You can't move. You'll ruin it. Anyway, but what makes me break a sweat is if I ever feel like I didn't honor or hear a story. Like if I feel like, oh, I misread the way the audience felt, or I responded in a way that assumed something that in hindsight may not have been what that person said, or I said something that made someone lock up instead of bring them out. And so it's not like I don't have the nerves about it before, but I think the beauty of this work is that it is very human and very personal, and there's a lot of vulnerability and risk involved, but that's the stuff that I like lay in bed at night and I'm like, did they feel heard? Did they feel loved? Did they feel seen?
And this is why I love you and why you're my friend. I am sure that a lot of people who are listening are very like, okay, how do I see a Moth show? How do I learn more about this? Obviously, we're all going to buy the book in April, but and I cannot wait to see your name on this book. So can you tell anyone who's listening how to get involved or where the best place to start is?
Sure. I mean, obviously there's our website, themoth.org, and you can link through to the podcast and radio show to hear stories. If you want to tell stories, you can go to an open mic. Now we're back live. I hosted the first live New York Slam. And
what was it like? First of all, what was it like to be back for the first time?
Honestly, like I was high 4 days. Like it's so amazing. I mean, the slams are open mic, so it's just like it's just people in the audience being called to the stage and sharing, and the crowds we just like, at one point I laughed so hard I was like, I'm like wiping mascara from my face, and I was like, at some point, like, and I was speaking, I was talking to people, I was like responding to something, I was like, I need to fucking get it together because I'm supposed to keep this moving. But I mean, I just love to be in community with people. I think I've said it 100 times. So anyway, so you can go to an open mic. You can find them. We're in cities all over the country. LA, New York, I'm sure is probably where a lot of your people are. And we're there. If you have a story that you want to tell, you can call our pitch line, which is also on the website. And we listen to every pitch and you will get a response. And you can obviously read our books. You know, I always say like stories beget stories. And also like the best way to become a better storyteller is to immerse yourself in storytelling. So to read stories, to listen to stories, and then to tell them, and you'll just get better and better. And the audience is the audience at the Moth is the best teacher, because they'll give you a laugh or they'll give you when you hit, and then, you know, when you feel like that, you're like, all right, I should probably edit that detail out.
And the best place to start is the Moth Podcast, where you can hear Kate's story. I have to say it again and again. I can't stop saying it. Kate, I'm so grateful for you bringing your heart and your art to this conversation today. I know that I would talk to you about a million other things besides this, but I just want to compliment you on how great it is to see you, you know, own this. I remember when you would walk over to the building on 37th Street and it was like your new job, right? And that now you're like running a huge department and go to many businesses all around the world and teach so many people storytelling. And I have zero doubt that you're making an impact in people's lives every day. So I'm so grateful you gave us a little time to witness that. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. It has been a great joy to be your friend through all of these years. Back with our headset mics. So
totally. All right, everybody.
Start playing the Pharaoh.
Start over.
Okay. So Brian, this is a story, as you know, I'm writing your eulogy, and I've been writing your eulogy for the early days of our friendship. I always knew, I think I'm very good at sensing who's going to be a great friend. So very quickly we were like, we're going to be friends. And so I started tracking things. I was like, I'm going to give his eulogy. You were good.
This is how you track a good friend. I'm going to be his good friend. I'll probably say his eulogy. I mean,
I'm a very good public speaker and we'll be friends till he dies. I'll probably be the one of them. Okay. Anyways, so you were playing the Pharaoh, getting your equity card in Philadelphia.
In Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Yes,
in Joseph. Yeah. And you were like on partial vocal rest, but you insisted on coming to work. But then you just made us try to understand. Your job was to talk to people. And I would be like, Brian, I'd message you and I'd be like, Brian, Tim is here for his 2:00. And you'd come out and you'd be like,
or just making faces and pointing. I can just, again, for my listeners who cannot see you, she's making faces and pointing with the most inane, like hardly even giving directions is what I'm seeing.
And then we all remember we used instant message to communicate. So then you would message me and you'd be like, can you tell Tim I need 5 copies of his resume? And I'd be like, you can't be at work if you can't speak. But that's just one. Can I give you this thing that I found?
Yes, please. Can you read it?
Yeah, I'm going to. I just have to bring it up because I accidentally turned it up.
So what is this?
This is an email that I sent to both you and myself of a text thread from the year of, I can't tell. And now it just blew up really big. Hold on one second. From 2020, just last year.
Okay.
And I text you at 10:49 p.m. Are you in America? Can I sleep in white strips?
Wait. Say it again.
One text. Are you in America? Can I sleep in white strips? Then you write back, yes. I have before, I think, but like you'll wake up and take them off. I don't want you to choke. And then I text back, I took them off. And then you text back, I'm at Swan Lake. And then I text, I'm really into good deep sleep lately and do not want to fucks with it. In Mexico, hall box. Like I don't even we don't even acknowledge the fact that you were at a full-on classical ballet and you're like, okay, needs to know about white strips. Hold on.
Wait, why are you asking about Mexico in the middle of my Swan Lake?
Because you had said that you had gone to whole box so that's why I was like, are you in America? I thought you were in, you never answered. Yes. So I was like, are you at Swan Lake in Mexico? Is it in Holbox? You said I should go to Holbox.
I don't even know how to say Swan Lake in Spanish, but I would be curious.
Is the ballet at Holbox good? Should we go?
Unacceptable.
Unacceptable.
Okay. Well, that was fun.